I'm sure
Good evening. Welcome to the Pullman City Council meeting for this Tuesday, October 27th. And Dee, would you please call roll?
Mayor Johnson,
Present.
Councilmember Chapman,
present.
Councilmember McCall,
Here.
Councilmember Parks,
Here.
Councilmember Records,
Here.
Councilmember Sorensen,
Here.
Councilmember Weller,
Present.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Under announcements tonight, all of us want our community members to be safe and healthy this Halloween. Recommendations from the Pullman Police Chief, Gary Jenkins, I read to you last week. They're posted on Halloween 2020 item in news and announcements section of our city website at pullman-wa.gov. The staff has moved to our new city hall on Southeast Crestview. However, out of abundance of caution, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the building is closed to the public, just like the old building was, except for the district court. City staff stands ready to serve everyone by phone or by email. The Palouse Regional Transportation Planning Organization, the RTPO, wants your input to shape recommendations. This is for safety and for engineering, dealing with sidewalks, trails, bikes, paths, etc. RTPO online public survey and interactive maps. For your virtual input until November 30th, 2020, you can visit the RTPO website at palousetrails.palousertpo.org and /survey HTM. You're invited to the Reimagining Public Safety in Pullman Virtual Summit on Monday, November 9th at 5:30. Pullman Police Chief Jenkins, WSU Police Chief Bill Gardner will present information regarding policies, procedures, training initiatives already in place at their respective agencies. Attendees will also be invited to participate in the breakout sessions. You register for the Zoom meeting before November 2nd. Follow the links, the Pullman Police Department website, and just find it right from there. It's very easy to find. Pullman Farmers Market is open every Wednesday, tomorrow from 3:30 to 6:30 at the Brailsford WSU Visitor Center at 150 East Spring Street. Well, the next item on our agenda tonight is the mayor's proposed budget, and it's my pleasure tonight, pleased to present the 2021-2022 budget for the city of Pullman, even in this time of daily challenges brought on by the uncertainties from COVID-19. However, there are some certainties. Those are state deadlines for city budgets. In addition, we are making the best financial projections for 2 years in this, our second biannual budget. While it's not normally in the city budget message, this year is different. I want our council and I want our residents to know how proud I am of our city employees who showed their resolve and took on the challenge of COVID-19 by helping the city continue to serve its residents with needed and vital services. We followed the governor's recommendations to protect our employees, modified our levels of service to reflect the best science coming from our public health professionals. Among those changes, it meant closing City Hall, but taking appointments, closing the library, but instituting curbside service, shutting down the aquatic center, but later reopening it at reduced levels, running our bus and dial-a-ride service, but at far less than capacity, and modifying our popular recreation programs to make sure all participants were safe. And with all these changes and challenges, we were able to move to our new city hall in Crestview during the second week of October, again demonstrating an outstanding work of our city team. We have an excellent financial staff led by Director of Finance and Administrative Services Mike Urban, ably assisted by Accounting Manager Lori Palmer, and a staff who do an outstanding job every day of analyzing and monitoring our entire city operation. They were supported by our executive management team who supervised their individual departments. When the pandemic hit, they were able to trim their budgets when asked, knowing that the governor's stay-at-home order impacted every business, every employee, and every resident. These supervisors were able to find savings in their approved budgets to help Pullman continue to serve vital services that all our residents depend on every day. And I know it was painful to temporarily furlough some of our great city employees as we rapidly adjusted the budget to sustain the city during this health and economic crisis. The biannual budget that we are presenting reflects several accounting changes. In the past, we've had a line item for insurance under general fund services that covered every department. Now, the expense for insurance is reflected in each department's budget. We have also combined several individual items into functional groups. For example, law enforcement now includes animal control, detention, and their portion of dispatch fees. Fire has been aggregated to fire and ambulance, also included in their portion of communications or dispatch fees. Previously, the city listed in the parks facilities budget the aquatic center and swimming pool portions of Rainy Pool. Now it's in the recreation budget. While we have held the line overall on additional personnel, there are a couple of exceptions. The council approved the SAFER grant that included 3 additional firefighters. 2 positions were already approved for 2019, 2 for 2020, and 3 positions for 2021. Council also added in October 2019 an economic development manager who, with COVID-19 impacting our businesses, was able to shift quickly into the business retention mode. Prudent suspension of recreation services to our vulnerable senior citizens during the pandemic led to the layoff of our senior coordinator. We have budgeted the coordinator position for the second quarter of 2021 if conditions improve. We budgeted for national recruitment of a city administrator for the first quarter of 2021. We went through the process of hiring a person for GIS position, but the offer was not accepted due to the impact of COVID. It was put on pause, and we're hoping to move on this before the end of the year to make sure the existing work that has been done stays relevant. That position is budgeted for the first quarter of 2021. Wage increases are reflected in the budget if established by contracts. Other changes that you'll notice reflect a significant increase in our election costs from Whitman County, as well as increases reflected in the district court agreement. Our liability insurance increased 31% from 2020 to 2021. We also will be replacing our Eden financial software because the parent company is no longer supporting the platform that has been in service for 20 years. This will be in a future capital improvements request. The general fund revenue for 2021 is estimated at $22,638,660, and the expenditure is estimated $24,640,048. For 2020, we are estimating the revenue at $23,150,404 and the expenditures at $25,277,640. Our goal has always been to have reserves reflect 2 months of operational costs, which is 16.67%, well above the long-established council set goal for reserves at 13%. Our calculations show reserves for 2021 24.32%, or $5,992,267. For 2022, just slightly under the 2-month goal of 16.06%, or $4,059,637. There are several items that we'll be facing that are not reflected in this budget. In addition to council work sessions on the future of the court service for Pullman, we anticipate work sessions to determine the fate of the old city hall, to determine the best alternatives. Securing property for our 3rd fire station, which was approved in the bond, is a priority for 2021, but we did not want to put a line item in this budget for the amount because it would only work against us when we attempt to acquire property. When we presented the first biannual budget, there was certainly no way that any city could have predicted the events of 2020 and the impact of COVID-19 would have on our lives and our city. But despite all the challenges that we have faced, we continue to move forward, with side steps here and there. And that progress can only be done with an outstanding group of individuals who work for the city of Pullman. I also want to thank our residents for their support for not only the bond issue, but for their patience and understanding as we all work together to get through this COVID challenge, and we will get through it together. For further information on the budget, we now go to Mike Urban.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. I'm getting my screen sharing going here so we can go through a very cut down 17 slides. All right. Can everybody see the header slide? Because I have everybody now off to the side. So as we've done several times in presentations before, I'd like to pause at the end of each slide and make sure that council has a chance to ask questions or make comments. So I will make sure I do that, but I can't see everybody. So please jump in and speak up so I can recognize you. But again, thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. Today's presentation is a little different in the past as we're doing it by Zoom. I was really hoping to do this in person. I had a lot of visual aids prepared for this, but it seemed a little wonky doing it on Zoom. So I'll save that for the next time we're all together. This is such an important document. One of my plans when I came here was to break up the workload over several units instead of just forcing all of this in one evening. There's a lot to take in here. So on the 6th of October, we held a revenue hearing to discuss that portion of the budget. And then tonight, I want to focus on the expense portion of the budget from a real high overview level. And the next two meetings, we can dig deep into each department and go through their functional operations and discuss how they've budgeted and what that means to the overall budget. I do have a calendar and a slide here that I'll go over with the community. But before I go on, are there any questions? All right, here we go. Hey, the calendar. All right, so my screen's over here, so if I look away, I apologize. There's special times and dates on a couple of these meetings that when the budget calendar was set by council back in July that we wanted to pay attention to and make sure that we had plenty of time to discuss the budget. So November 2nd is our next meeting. That is a Monday. It will be at 6 p.m. It will be online as well. We're going to do a budget workshop with some of the functional groups: police, fire, administrative services, IT, parks and facilities, participant recreation, library, and other miscellaneous funds, which would be like the 120 fund, the firefighters retirement and pension fund, and those. The next meeting will be back to Tuesday, but again at 6 p.m. We want to give council plenty of time to work with the department heads and go over our budgets. So those groups would be the public works, utilities, street funds, maintenance and operations, planning, economic development, our inspection services, and transit. So a lot of what Kevin Gardis's his purview is. So we kind of group that all onto one night. On November 17th, we get back to normal schedule, 7 p.m. on Tuesdays. City Council will have their public hearing and take comments from the community on the proposed budget. And that's also the night we're asking the council to set the property tax levy due to time restrictions. We need to have those documents up to the county for the county commissioners to ratify where we go next on that. And the same goes true for the Metropolitan Parks District on both of those issues. Now, originally, when we set the budget calendar, we had locked down Tuesday, December 1st at 7 p.m. for City Council to adopt the final budget as well as Metropolitan Parks District. That's the placeholder. We certainly want to give council plenty of time to discuss, deliberate, and decide if the budget can move forward or if there's any changes that need to be done. So December 1st is certainly a placeholder. If council would like more time, then we can certainly slide that back. We do need to adopt this budget though before the end of 2020. So that's the only restriction towards the budget separate of the property tax levy. And then the last day we had on the original calendar was December 15th to do our year-end items, clean up with the budget amendments, any of our accounts receivable write-offs, and then renew the airport loan agreement that we do every other year. So that's the date driven items again are November 17th to set the property tax levy, end of the year for the budget, but hopefully we can get to a point by December 1st. So is there any questions on this slide before I move on to the next one? Outstanding. Okay, for the general public and those city staffers that were calling and asking me where to find this document, I just wanted to take a quick moment and show you what it would look like online. If you go to our website at pullman-wa.gov, you'll hit the main landing page. And if you scroll down about a third of the way, maybe halfway, you'll see this icon here with the 21-22 budget. And all you need to do is click on the text at that graphic, and then it will take you to a page that looks like this, where these dates are repeated again, and the times. We're gonna, yep. And right there where I have it circled in red, there's a view preliminary budget. So when I start talking about page numbers here as this process goes on, and I'm referring to those, you can refer along with us. And if you want to download that or print it and study it at home, thank you. Nothing makes an accountant happier. But that's where you could find this document outside of the city. Is there any questions on this from council? Okay. So now that you have the budget, I just want to do kind of a brief tour of it and what you're looking for and what you can expect. So when I arrived here 19 months ago, my goal, I had some goals in mind with this budget. I worked with the city administrator towards and coming to a document that I think can be more informative to the community and certainly to the council as well, where we can be discussing our departments and talking about our mission and how that applies to the city council goals. I got part of the way there on this process, and then the next biennium, I hope to get all the way there. But when you look at the document, pages 5 and 7 is the mayor's message as he read at the beginning of this. This is very important. It's the mayor's proposed budget to the city council as for their consideration for action. The next section, pages 9 through 19, statistical data that helps drive budget decisions, where our assessed property value has gone, how our population growth is going, where our how many residential structures do we have, so we can look at where our housing is. Or is it multifamily? Is it single family? Or do we have a shortage? Then pages 28 or pages 20 through 27 is kind of the budget summary, the overall view, which is a lot of what we'll be talking about tonight. When I refer to pages, it's the aggregation of all the budgets and how that fits in each piece of the pie citywide. Pages 28 through 37 is a general fund summary, then the general fund details. I'm certainly going to touch on those tonight too, as far as what departments make up the general fund and why that's important due to the volatility of the revenues coming in for that, where other funds do have their own revenue thresholds and ways to get through that. Which, starting on page 82, those are those other city funds that have their own revenue generation, like utilities, and their own expenses that comes out of that revenue generation. And then the last two parts are kind of these little one-off things that are still very important to the budget. On page 112 is our agency fund, which is the Pullman Moscow Regional Airport. The city of Pullman is the partner of record for this group. The board of directors for the airport has already approved their budget, and that's what you're seeing in the document, and it is part of the budget that we adopt overall. Unlike the city of Pullman, they are an annual budget. So when you look in the statistics, you'll see that 2021 is a much higher budget than 2022 because we haven't adopted or haven't considered adopting the airport budget yet because it's not ready for print. And then the last item on here on page 114 is our intergovernmental fund, which is the Metropolitan Parks District, which the City Council also serves as members of the Board of Directors for. And that's another deal we'll talk about tonight. They do have a hand-in-hand relationship with the city, but they are their own separate entity and do need to be discussed as such. So that's a brief tour of the budget document. Are there any questions on this slide? Okay, so there were some process upgrades when I arrived, and the first one I want to talk about was to increase city council and staff engagement. And just that's really taking the volume of this document and what it takes to put a budget together and talk about 2 years worth of operations in every department. And instead of just, drinking from a fire hose on one night, spreading that out so thoughtful conversations can happen. We can piece it together and chunk it together and put together that deal. So with the revenue hearing a couple weeks ago, now with the general overview, splitting the departments in half, doing a night on one half, a night on another half, and then having a public hearing after all of that has happened, where the councils had some time to review the document, hear from the department heads, hear from the public, and be able to talk about any changes or if they want to adopt it as is. So the next item, let me see if this works. Yeah, it did. So I leaned really hard on our operational expertise of the department managers, both financially on the abstracts and in these presentations coming here. So being here for 19 months, I've dug in deep. I'm learning how the departments come together and what their rhythm and their cycles are. But the experts are the ones that are managing the departments, and they've been excellent partners. They've really rolled up their sleeves and worked hard on this. All the abstracts you see are their work, word for word. And financially, I work with them to help make sure we're capturing everything and getting things in the right bars numbers, and talking to them about outlook, and letting them look at where these much like when we did the COVID cuts, where do you need your budget to be to perform your operational tasks. So they've all been outstanding to work with, and taken the change all in stride. Change is hard for everybody, but they've been really good sports about it. As the mayor mentioned earlier, the goal is presenting a more accurate picture of city activity to the council and the community. So we did a few things in here to make sure that happened. And the first thing was we rolled a lot of one-off, as I call it, departments into the actual functional activity, taking the fire budget and the ambulance budget and combining it into fire and ambulance, because that's the way Chief Heston operates his department. Then taking the dispatch portion that stood alone and allocating the police portion of that and the fire portion of that to their actual activities. So any departments that we rolled up, when you get into the latter pages of this, they're underneath their budget grid, you will see a note in there saying this department also formally was this and this. So this type of combining, when we look at something, say, for participant recreation, where they lived by themselves at participant recreation and the aquatic center had their own fund, and then the portion of Rainy Pool was tucked into parks. Even though Kurt Damon has purview over all of this, it was spread out. So the trick was just to bring everything all together. We didn't get all the way there. There was a couple other funds, most notably cemetery fund, how that works hand in hand with the parks department, did need to stay separate at this point, and that's something we'll look at as the bars numbers change. But the initial roll up was quite extensive. So if you're looking at an old budget and trying to compare it to the new budget, don't lose faith. It's in there. Just might be in a different place, and we got to think about that functional group. So animal control is a function of police, and that's where it lives. The next thing we did is distributed the interfund rates to the functional activities. There was a few departments that didn't have interfund rates, but had services to that interfund. Most notably, I can think of like HR didn't have a IT component that the finance department was paying for a lot of that. In fact, if you look at some of these things, a lot of these IT and facility charges the finance department was paying for. That's it's not a real accurate representation of what these departments and the functional groups are actually doing. So we took a hard look at interfunds and spread those across proportionally to each of the departments, as you know, if it's facilities based on square footage, if it's IT based on users and technology. So some rework had to be done in those departments, but they again took that in stride. And then, as the mayor mentioned as well, to distribute the general fund insurance cost to all departments, just like all the other funds. Beforehand, we had a 001, which is the general fund delineator, and then 0.1900, that was just a catch-all for the insurance. And what we were noticing is that it as insurance rose, the departments that had involvement with those insurance rising weren't being properly represented by it. So we called several different cities. We talked to our insurance carrier about the proper way to represent this, and we came up with a formula. So when you hear from all of our department heads that they've had an increase in cost of insurance, it's not because the insurance cost per se went up, which it actually did 31%. It's that we took it out of this standalone fund and then attributed a piece to everybody. So when we look at our insurance costs, the drivers behind it are worker hours and claims. So the departments that have a lot of worker hours and a lot of workers and have a lot of overtime, their insurance costs tend to be a little higher than the other departments because that's where the exposure tends to go. But that is a more accurate representation of what each department is costing to the city of Pullman residents. So that was one of the changes we made as well. And the last thing, I asked the department heads when they went to go put their budgets together to not just put a number in for the end of the year. I wanted them to look quarterly and project those numbers out, because when I come to council to do the quarterly updates, it's really hard for me to see how they're doing against budget. Because you would think, well, you know, we're a quarter of the way through the year, they should be a quarter of the way through the budget. And that's not entirely accurate, because take, for instance, IT, where they have a lot of their software licenses front loaded in the first quarter of the year. And if they go and pay those, all of a sudden I say, whoa, hey, you're at 100% of your budget and it's only the first quarter, what's going on? This is an easy way to explain it. So looking at it from a quarterly budget, now I can start presenting to the council starting at the end of the first quarter, saying, here's how each department went against what their projected budget is. And then we can identify concerns a lot sooner. So that was really the big process updates that we had from me coming in and working with the city administrator and the mayor to come up with a document that would be more representative of what is actually going on in the city of Pullman. Any questions on this slide? Okay, so the next thing is some budget strategies. So when we had our budget call on July 13th, things were still quite in a state of flux financially. COVID was well on its way and we were still trying to get our hands around everything. So a lot of what we did and what we asked the departments to do were based on this, and being able to act and react nimbly. And if the economy improves and money becomes available, we can certainly do some more things. But the last thing we wanted was to present council a budget that wasn't going to be entirely accurate. And before the ink is even dry, we're talking to you in the first quarter of next year about cuts, because we were just way too optimistic. So the first thing we asked staff is to consider that the expected revenue for 2021 is going to be similar to 2022 in our COVID environment. And then on top of that, we added that the expected revenue for 2022 will be similar to 2021. So we just kind of strung that along. And the way I've been mentioning this to people as an aside, when we projected these revenues, I think on the 2021 revenue, I was optimistically realistic. But on 2022, I may have been a little pessimistically realistic. So we certainly hope things bounce back and come right around and everybody's returned to normal and football games happen again with full crowds and in the meantime, everybody is still staying safe and healthy. That's the ultimate goal behind all of this. But the dollars coming in certainly affect the services going out and the dollars to pay for that. So we want to be very careful as to not overextend ourselves. So our next strategy that we employed was to ask our departments that on any minor equipment purchases, if they could hold off on any non-emergent equipment until the second quarter. Really kind of want to get through flu season, see how the economy is going in that first quarter. It slides things back a little bit and gives us a little bit more room to adjust if things are necessary. We certainly told all the departments, though, if there's something that needs to go right away, please put in the request and, let us know what it is, and we will look at it certainly on a case-by-case basis. So departments that need something aren't sitting there with their hands tied, waiting for April 1st to do Mother May I. But it certainly gives the council and me as the budget manager some extra flexibility. In the same vein, we asked for the same thing out of our capital purchases for 21, but we've asked for that to move until the third quarter because those tend to be more expensive items. But with the same request, if there is something that needs to be done sooner, if there's something that's got a long lead time, make the request early because we certainly don't have to pay for it until the third or fourth quarter. And then we have some options too if the world goes a different direction. So that's another strategy that we're using in this budget and trying to work with our cash flow. The next item is the Lawson Gardens building, and we did not include a line item for this construction in 2021, although we expect it to happen in 2021, simply because it's going out to bid next month, and I would really hate to put a price in there of what we're expecting to pay for it, and if we could have got it for less. I just think it's kind of a bad negotiation strategy. So once the item goes out for bid and the bids are looked at and accepted, and we feel like we can bring one to City Council for approval, I will also be bringing a budget amendment along with it for consideration to be able to do that project. So that's more of a strategy trying to get the best price for our taxpayers on this project. And in a similar vein, Fire Station 3, as the mayor alluded to, we're taking the same tactic with this. I've had discussions with Chief Heston about what we're going to start looking at doing in the first quarter to identify and acquire some property. But the same thing, I really hesitate to put a price in there because I know if I were the property owner, I would go look at the budget and whatever the offer was, I know I could raise it up to possibly the point of the total budget because that's what's been set aside for it. So our hope with this is to work with City Council during executive sessions like we would do on any property acquisition, talk about the highest possible price we would absolutely pay and a negotiation strategy. And when the right piece of property is identified, a price has been set and City Council has approved it. When we go to approve the contract, very similar to Lawson Gardens, I would bring back a budget amendment with this item for the purchase. The money on both of these items, again, is still there. It's just, I did not want to identify it as an expense in this budget. And the fact that the Station 3 item comes out of bond funds and Lawson Gardens as well, plus some donation that we have in a separate reserve right now. The funds are there. It's a negotiation strategy from developed by the mayor, city administrator, and myself. The 2021 CIP items have been included in the budget as expenses, as well as the 2021 CIP is part of the budget book in the back. So if you need to refer to something as to what's being done in these departments, that we did include that in the budget. However, we did not pull the 2022 items in there yet because that CIP just hasn't been approved. So that's something we'll bring back as a budget amendment after the CIP process in 2022 and do those budget amendments for those projects that we'll be talking about next summer going forward. Now, when you look at the budget overall, you're going to see some 2022 capital purchases, even in the general fund. And those items specifically are library books and other media for that department. We still treat that as a capital purchase, even though it's not a true capital by the accounting definition of it. But that's past practice. It's not a bad practice, and I thought it was best to keep that going. So when you look at it and you say, hey, what's going on here? Start by zeroing into the library budget, and then you can see that a lot of those are for books and media. Limit the staffing increases, unfilled positions, and the COLAs. As the mayor mentioned, that we looked at staffing increases very, very carefully in this environment. Council's aware, because you approved the SAFER grant, that that's coming in there. There's a couple more positions that are proposed throughout the city due to workload, and as the departments come in front of you over the next 2 weeks, we're going to discuss that in extent. One of the unfilled positions that I'm actually starting to worry about that I wanted to take a moment and discuss with council is the GIS position. That one just was bad timing. We were well on our way to hiring somebody, and it was right as COVID was starting to hit, and things just didn't work out. But in the meantime, all those layers of GIS work have been sitting and waiting and needing updating. And we're starting to worry that if we wait too long on this GIS position, that things are going to get a little unmanageable, to put it lightly. This was a position budgeted in 2020. We've held off on it for items. It's budgeted again in 2021, and over the next week or two, I'm going to be talking about the need to move on that so we can get somebody in here and take care of our investment, because we have spent several $100,000s with the state on this. And as the mayor mentioned earlier too, cost of living adjustments are limited strictly to those contracts that have called for them. There's no COLA for non-represented staff. We have a couple contracts that expire at the end of 2020 and 2021, and we're working towards getting those resolved. And as these contracts go through the negotiations, we'll certainly sit down and talk to council about the dollar amounts involved in that and where we can absorb these in the budget or not. And then the last thing is, I think the managers are kind of sick of hearing me saying sharpen your pencil. There was several times where we looked at trying to make sure we met our goal to city council for adequate reserves, where we would go back and talk to them about what they were doing operationally and where their pain points were. And I would have to say, I need another 1%. I need another $400,000. I need another, hey, sharpen your pencil and dig in. If you need some help, let me know. So we spent a lot of time with them, and they worked really hard and did an excellent job. But some of the challenges they face with the sharpening of the pencil, for instance, the liability insurance going up 31%. There's the county prosecutor contract in Gary's budget. The WICOM charges, WICOM was here presenting what their changes are going to be, and that was a significant cost to the city. So that needed to be absorbed in the police and fire and ambulance budgets. The auditor service of cost of performing elections in the legislative budget. And you see this rising cost just all across the board, that things are still going up. They're not stagnant so much. We saw it in the prevailing wage when we opened bids for new city hall. So we're being charged more for our services, and the departments are doing their best to continue to hold the line on expenses. And the stuff that we can control, we're absolutely controlling. But being a member of WICOM and needing our dispatching is very, very important to this community. So when we look at a 15+% increase, we just need to absorb that somewhere. So that's kind of some of the budget strategies that we looked at going into the doc and creating this. And this is the last thing before we get into the actual top of the budget. So I see Nathan's hand up. I'll start with him for questions.
Thank you, Mike. You had brought up the issue of GIS, and that has been near and dear to my heart. That's been something I've been emphasizing for many, many, many years. So you're saying we have a stack of projects currently that are not being done. We have no staff on them. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're just being collected and saved and stored, but they're not getting the full GIS treatment. And this is certainly something that the city of Pullman has taken the lead in Whitman County to do, but we just haven't staffed it or been able to staff it yet. I'm thinking that the process could start, but I certainly want to have a thoughtful conversation with the mayor and council. But this is an important investment, and we've already spent some money on it. And I'm worried that if it continues to go on too long, it's going to become untenable. We might have to start over. I'm not saying that's happening tomorrow, but if it continues to go on, if we're like, well, let's wait until the end of COVID, then I want to bring a few more people in for this discussion and say, well, what would that really look like?
Okay. Having gone through GIS myself, and taking the classes for this, I met with WSU several years ago on the process that they're conducting, and how they were trying to collaborate with us. Now, I don't want that, falling by the wayside. In addition, I believe there is some work being done out in Whitman County. Their last, maybe it's Colfax, the city administrator several years ago had started the process. So, is there any way to look at, I mean, I know we can't afford right now full time, but internships, something along those lines, professional internships?
I think if this was a process that was going along already and we just need some extra bodies to help data entry and putting layers together and those types of things, I agree that's a good way to do it. But since we're really starting from scratch, I think we need to make sure that the foundation work that we're putting in is right and buildable and scalable.
Okay.
Mike, if I can add a little bit, we had the AWC crew that had the GIS program here. They did quite a bit of the work. We've got GIS at the cemetery. We've got some other areas we've already done. It's just a case we wanted to have a full-time person doing this. We have data that's been sent from Public Works, from RJ, and from others. Eventually, and that's why we want to get this GIS person here before the end of the year, so we can continue that, so that the data that we already have doesn't get too badly dated. But we have done a lot of the work already. And yes, Colfax did a couple of years ago when they had the city manager who went to College Place. Whitman County is doing some work right now too. So we're all pitching in the same direction.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, because that was my other question. I had heard that some of our departments in the city are utilizing GIS independently, but I guess you're saying is bringing it all together. That's the key right now. Okay. All right.
Yeah, 100%.
Mike, I saw Al had a hand up.
Okay, Al?
This is off of the GIS topic. Are we done with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a couple of quick maybe questions and comments in regards to the Lawson Gardens building and the Fire Station 3 land acquisition. For my knowledge, and maybe the public, how long do we have to spend the bond funds for those things that were part of the bond?
I don't believe there is a true set date per se. But I also know that the City Hall project is done, and so it's not occupying time. Lawson Gardens, it is ready to go out to bid. We were going to put it out to bid in December when the contractors were hungriest, so we can get the best price possible. And I talked to Kevin Gardis last week and volunteered to take over the Station 3 acquisition, property acquisition, leading that. And I've been in conversations with Mike Heston. I would like to see that done by the end of the year. 21,
Okay.
end of 21. Sorry, not this year.
Okay. I also think it'll be super important, as we've said here, for the general public to understand that when we move along with these projects, it was bond money and money that's already been more or less put aside for this. We're not just starting new projects because, you know, they see us doing these things that can just have kind of a bad impression. So I want to make sure that when we move forward with this stuff, that everybody knows it's not just us doing it because of things we have forward. So that was just what I wanted to say.
No, thank you. I appreciate you bringing that up and reminding the public that we are just fulfilling the commitment of what they voted for.
Pat Wright also has a hand up, Mike.
Pat?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mike. And along the same lines of what Councilmember Sorensen just brought up, if for some reason we put a bid out for the Lawson Gardens building and the bid comes back way in excess of the bond dollars and the tourism dollars that we had for, what happens then? And this may be more of a Laura question. And I don't remember how the bond was written, but can those funds be repurposed or redirected to similar capital improvement type projects?
I think Kevin, if he's still on the line, there's a couple strategies that we could employ. I'm going to let Kevin jump in if he's still around. I can only see 5 of us. You know, we could talk about scaling the project back. We could talk about a rebid. And then as far as redeploying those bond dollars, I would want to lean on Laura here since she was involved in putting that bond together where I wasn't. And I don't know what the restrictive covenants are on those.
So the bond funds can be reallocated by action of the city council if you determine that it's not feasible to do the project that was originally planned. So that language is always designed with that flexibility because of the fact that you're asking for voter approval very early on in the concept stage before you have actual design, and then obviously economic conditions can impact that. There is, going back to Councilmember Sorensen's question about when the proceeds have to be spent, there, because they were tax exempt bonds, there is what's called a spend down period. Briefly summarized, it's 5 years to have it spent, but spent is defined as a expense. So you could have a project under contract within the 5-year anniversary date of the issuance of the bonds and still have satisfied that spend down requirement.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay, thank you both.
And I'd be happy to weigh in on the over budget question. I guess before that, just to make a comment, if we put this off a couple more years, bidding some of these projects, we can expect the cost to go up with inflation. So getting the bond projects done sooner rather than later, I think, is from a bottom line standpoint. And depending on where the bids come in, if we're close, maybe if we're over a little bit, I think we can present a strategy for getting us back. If it's over a lot, then we'll have to have a more in-depth discussion about what we do.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay. Al?
I got one other quick. So we've kind of got a 5-year timeline. When did the bonds get issued, Laura? You remember the date?
I knew you would be asking, so I was pulling up the transcript. Issuance date.
think I have them in this office
Uh,
here.
You do. So they were issued August 17 of 2018.
Okay.
So
we're over
23.
2 years
August,
into it right now.
yeah, August 17 of 23, you need to have the funds fully allocated to a project, and that simply means under contract.
So, and then Laura, so if for some reason it turned out that we decided that the project wasn't gonna work, do we have to have the new project
Allocated.
allocated by the end? It's still within that 5, it doesn't extend it any.
Yeah, so it's something that Mike will be watching. It's something that I watch as bond counsel is 5 years out, or well, 4 years out. Where are you on spending the funds? Do you need to look at your other capital projects and reallocate it because one of the original expenses isn't going to be able to happen? It's not feasible. So that happens commonly.
Okay, my concern is that things will move quickly, our time will move quickly, and we got to keep moving forward with the project.
Sure.
So, okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Pat?
Thank you, Mike. And not to belabor the point, but the cost estimate on the Lawson Gardens building was done well before the bond was issued. So the likelihood that an estimate is going to come in quite a bit higher than what was originally identified as the potential cost is really concerning. And now, given the narrower window to make a decision and then reallocate those funds, I would think that we kind of need to be moving on this one pretty quickly. Just my thought. I just throw it out there. Again, not to belabor anything, but I think we need to be thinking about that.
No, and I agree. It's ready to go to bid. It's going out in November, later in November, I believe, with bid opening and construction to start in 2021 early. And if it's another situation like City Hall, where it came in over the estimate, we'll look at other ways to plug the hole or consider a rebid, but certainly bring council into the decision-making process by giving them options. Al?
Just real quick, Kevin, back to Pat's point about when the estimate was done for this. I'm sure that we readjusted the number a little bit before we sent the bond out, didn't we? Or did we just go with that?
That I don't know, Al. We will definitely do a updated cost estimate before we go out to bid because we provide that to the contractor. So I'm going to be asking for that estimate in the next few weeks. So that'll give us time to maybe, one of the strategies we use if we're concerned about the bid coming in within the budget is having additive items, that we could award if the bids come in favorable, or things that we wouldn't award if they're not favorable. So we'll try to set it up as best we can to give ourselves options.
Okay, thank you.
Pat?
Sorry, just one last bite here. The Lawson Gardens building was initially proposed as a fundraising opportunity, and the Lawson Gardens committee was, I'm simplifying this a bit, was charged with raising funds for the garden center or the garden house, with the agreement that it was like $1.5 million, if I'm recalling correctly, with the agreement that the lodging tax dollars would match that amount of money that was fundraised by the committee. And there was a sunset date on that, which came right up against when the bond was issued. So I guess then that leads to the further question: should, for whatever reason, we not go forward with that building, what then happens with those lodging tax dollars?
Mr. Mayor, would you like me to answer that?
Yes.
So as you may recall, Pat, that when that recommendation was made at the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee level, it's not in what the city council actually approved. So those funds didn't actually sunset. Those lodging tax funds are still available and allocated to the Lawson Gardens Pavilion and Event Facility. So those
Okay.
are still available to be used. And then the bond itself was, it's the only thing in the project list that's identified as partial funding. So the bond proceeds themselves were never intended to fully pay for the cost of that project.
Okay. Okay, I've had a few people ask me about that, and so this seemed like an appropriate time to get some clarification on that. So thank you.
That was a really good point, and it is something that I know caused some confusion at the beginning. But if we've gone back and looked at the record, and the actual grant awarded by the council does not sunset the grant itself. So those funds are still available out of that fund.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm done.
I can see a couple more folks. Am I missing anyone that would like to, any council that would like to speak on this?
Yeah,
Eileen?
Mike.
Take Eileen first.
So, I mean, this sort of seems to be the year of worst case scenario.
Right.
So in the event of worst case scenario and the Lawson Gardens thing does not come together, and again, back to that reallocation of funds, what's the process? So if we decide to reallocate those funds, do we have to have a hard target? Do we have to have an if then else? Do we have to have a landing spot, or do we just say we have an empty box? And I use that term deliberately.
Mike, do you want me to take that?
Yeah, I'm going to let you jump in, Laura.
Okay, so council member, the hard target is the 10,500,000 in total bond proceeds that have to be allocated within the 5-year IRS spin down period. The language of the election resolution and the bond ordinance both allow for the city council, if it looks like they can't spend the funds on the identified projects, the original identified projects, to allocate any unspent proceeds to any capital project that the city council deems necessary and in the best interest of the city. So what would happen is Mike and Kevin would be watching what's going on with the total bond funds spent, bond proceeds that are spent, and then coming back to the city council after they get the data, the figures from bids or whatever, and making a recommendation to you on whether those funds need to be allocated to a different capital project than the 4 that were identified in the election resolution. And that would be an opportunity for the city council to take public input on that, just like you took public input on the original projects. You're not required to, but it certainly is a good practice.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Brandon, you had a question?
Oh, in terms of the gardens, I had a question for, I guess, Kevin, because of the city hall where we were over what was estimated, I was curious where that first estimate came from, and if you have an idea of how, how much before, we put this to the voters it was. I fully understand that we're gonna, do another cost estimate, but where did that first cost estimate come from, and did we do that, or did we have somebody else do that for us?
I wasn't involved in it, but my assumption would be that Design West Architects, they did the original conceptual design for Lawson Gardens, and they're doing the final design. they would have generated that original cost estimate. Typically, staff wouldn't do that for a building.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on this slide before we move on? Okay. So now we're into the actual budget document. So this slide is referring to page 24, if you're following along. So we're looking at the 2021 city expenses by activity, really by department. And you'll see the budget is $72,826,903. And that does not include the airport portion of this. This is the city funds. And as you look around, you see the pieces of the pie, you can tell the utilities is our biggest portion. That's 30.5% of our budget there to make up that 22.2 million. The next biggest is fire and ambulance at 11.2%, making up the 8.1 million. And law enforcement, 10.6%. And then the next one is the internal service funds at 10.1%, making up the 7.3 million. And just a quick note on what internal service funds, that's our equipment rental department who owns all of our fleet and basically rents it back to the departments to make sure that the equipment continues running, it's cared for, and then it's maintained to be replaced on a regular schedule. Also in an interfund would be our IT department, very similar with our computer infrastructure, the telephones, and making sure all our software is up to date. And then the last group would be the facilities group, making sure that all the buildings, the janitorial work is done, all the repair work. So those three departments make up our internal service funds, and their customer is the city of Pullman other funds. So we just treat it like another enterprise fund, much like utilities is an enterprise fund to the external customers like me, who has a high water bill because his kid likes to play in the grass. So the last item to touch on is you see an other. Whenever I see other or miscellaneous, I always feel compelled to explain a little bit. There's a bunch of these smaller funds like the Civic Improvement Fund, the Firefighter Retirement and Pension Fund, and a couple of the endowment funds for cemetery and Lawson Gardens. We just kind of aggregate some of those really small ones together to call them other. So this is what your 2021 expenditure budget looks like citywide if it were a pie. So any questions on this page?
Yes, I have one, Mike.
Sure.
All right. So I appreciate the breakdown. Two questions. One is, do you have, I know the part, so I could go through and do the percentages of all of this. I'd rather not. Do you have the ability to provide us with percentage of the whole that each of these is, you know, what they are percentage wise? And I would really appreciate a breakdown of what other and public services you know, encompasses. Having such general terms on these, you know, for instance, where is library on here? I know to the community, myself included, it's a very important part. So
Yeah,
I mean,
we're about,
everybody is equally important, but I don't see them out there, you know, at all. Is that under public services?
it is, and in 4 slides, I was going to address the library portion of that when we got into the general fund, and there was a little less to see. And as far as the percentages go, if you refer to page 24, there's actually 2 of these charts. The one at the top does it by percentage, and the one at the bottom does it by dollar amount. I chose to present the dollar amount to the public and then just talk about the percentages. But if you look at it, they're all aggregated on the same page in the document, as
Gotcha.
Eileen is showing us.
Gotcha. I was just so enthralled with this pie chart that I forgot to bring up that percentage. So, Mike, thank you. Okay.
No problem. But just as it even though it's a slide a couple away, it's going to come up a couple more times. So public services is the aggregation of the library, participant recreation, parks facilities, cemetery, and there's a community improvement fund would make up the public services, but I will expand that again too. And as long as we're on it, community and economic development would be the building and protective inspections division, the planning department, and economic development. Okay. All right. Any other questions on this one? Okay. Now, if you're following along in the budget book, we've moved to page 25. It's taking that previous slide by department and saying, okay, what is the department spending the money on? And that's the city expenses by category, still the same expenditure there for 2021. And as you can see, a large proportion of that is salaries and benefits to the tune of 39%. The next biggest item is the capital expenditures part of that, 15 million, makes up 21.6%. A lot of that right now, even though there isn't a whole lot of general fund capital expenditures due to the CIP and the curtailment of that, there's a lot of big utility projects out there that make up that 21%. And then the last part is the other operating expenses make up 16.9%. So those types of things in the budget include the insurance, software licenses, training and education for staff, travel to get to those training opportunities, advertising, whether it's for a bid opening or a new job that falls under those other operating expenses. Minor equipment, certainly they're at not quite 1% at 0.7. Those are those small purchases, anything from replacing an office chair to rope rescue equipment with the fire department, things that fall under that CIP but are still things that we're purchasing. Supplies at 3.7%. Those are your office and operating supplies, everything from reams of paper to de-icer to keep our roads clear so people can travel. Interfund expenses are 8%, and then operating transfers out. Most of that is from the utility funds into their capital funds. So the utility earns the money and then transfers it over to the capital fund to do the jobs, perform the work. So that's just kind of an aggregation of how that 2021 item spends out through the city by function. So is there any questions on this page? And again, same with all of these. As I show you, I chose to show the dollar amounts. The percentage lives on the same page right above. So I'm using the same cheat sheet that others have. So I'm reading those percentages off. I do not have them memorized. I wish I was that good. Okay.
Mike?
Yes.
This is Dan. I actually have a question about the previous slide. Looking at kind of over the last couple of years, looking at fire and ambulance and law enforcement kind of together, looks like we have an increase in fire. Is that due to the increased staffing?
Primarily, yeah. There was 2 positions added in 19, 2 and 20, and then there's 3 in 21 for this budget. There's some other operational items that can make up for that. On page 21, you can see you can look at the raw data as to what each of the departments did. And yeah, law enforcement went this direction and fire has gone the other. So
I'm just kind of wondering if it's are we anticipating expenses in 2021 that are going to be related to COVID still for fire and ambulance?
I would say certainly.
Okay.
Certainly, and to the point where I'd like to have a discussion under new business to discuss PPE in that same vein. Yeah, I think COVID, my biggest concern when I was talking to the emergency management group about that is that the cold, mostly the flu, presents as COVID until you have the test. We don't know. So through flu season, it's certainly on our minds to keep the community and our staff safe.
All right, thank you.
You got it. Any questions on this slide? Okay. We're going to move on now. We're going to do it all over again, except we're going to talk about 2022. Everything is very similar. This is page 26 of the book. Again, this is without the airport because the airport does not have a 2022 budget to present. And it's a $70,207,197 budget. The percentages are very, very similar, with utilities at 33.8% being our biggest amount. Fire and ambulance, 11.6%, and law enforcement, 11.3%. And then we have streets and arterial streets moving up to number 4 at 9.2%, because we're doing a lot of those every other year type projects. So in 2022, we have a few more projects going on than the internal service fund, which is at 7.2%, making up those differences. So this very similar to 2 slides ago, but this is just 2022 as we're talking about the biennial budget. So are there any questions on this one? Okay. Again, 2022, same amount, same as the 2 slides ago. How are those dollars getting broken up? This is page 27 of the budget book. Salaries and benefits are the biggest chunk, 41.6%. Gets us to that point. Capital expenditures, again, we're still doing those utility projects, making up 17.9%. And right behind that in the yellow there are other operating expenses at 17%. So very similar. The numbers shift a little bit if you look at these pie charts next to each other, but very similar to what we saw in 2021. Okay. Any questions on this before we jump into the general fund? We're getting there, folks. This is slide 12. I'm going to out of 17. So the general fund, now we're taking away all the other funds that have their own revenue source, and we're looking at all those general fund items that use property tax, sales tax to operate and maintain their expenditures versus the utility funds that charge us for their service. So this chart's on page 33. And very similar to what we've seen before. I'm presenting the dollars. I'll talk about percentages here. And $24,640,048 budget is what's proposed for 2021. And you picked up on this, Dan, that fire and ambulances moved ahead of law enforcement at $8.1 million. It's 33% of the budget. And law enforcement is right behind at 31.3% of the budget. So those two make up 64.3% of the budget. Public services, again, this is your library, participant recreation, parks facilities, cemetery, 5.5 million, it's 22% of the budget. Economic and community development, that's the planning department, buildings and protective inspections, as well as the economic development department. That's 5.3% of the budget. And then that last green part, because that's money and finances in there, that's administration. So that's the legislative function, the executive function, as well as finance and the clerk, HR, legal, those all live in there. And that's 8.1% of our budget. Yep, I got all my notes. We point these out again very specifically because the volatility of sales tax does affect these very directly. So as sales tax numbers decrease. Some of the other departments aren't nearly as affected by that because they have their own revenue streams, where this group does. And if you look on page 32, it breaks down each department with the raw data, so you can see what is making up the general fund and how these departments are doing dollar for dollar wise. And we'll be talking about each department over the next 2 weeks on that. Any questions on this slide? Okay. Very similar to what we did in the last grouping. Now we're going to look at it by what is their actual expense by category. Again, this is page 34 now of your budget book. Salaries and benefits at $18 million. That's 73.3% of the budget of the general fund right there. Other operating expenses make up the next 12.6%. And then the interfund rate of 10.8%, the $2.6 million, that's what we're paying for fire engines back to the ERD department. It's what we're paying for computers in my department. It's the facilities. So the recreation department has the building next door and can hold functions inside. So those are those items broken down very similarly like that. Same dollar amount, just a different way to look at it. This was page 34 if I forgot to mention that, but I'm sorry, any questions on this? Okay, we're almost there. We're going to do this again, but we're going to look at it for 2022. This is on page 35. Same, fire and ambulance is 32.3% of the budget at $8.1 million. Law enforcement at $7.9 million makes up 31.5%. So our public safety portion, again, is 63.8% of the general fund budget. And then you can see where our public services is 22.3%, community and economic development 5.6%, and administration 8.3%. Again, very similar to the previous year. And the total budget for 2022 is $25,277,640. Okay. Any questions on this one? All right. Very similar to 2 slides ago, same dollar amount. We're looking at the category expenses. This is page 36 of your budget book. And you can see salaries and benefits at 18.5 million make up 73.3%. Other operating expenses, 13.2%. Interfund at 11.4%. Kind of the bigger difference. Now, it's not really that big of a difference. It's the capital expenditures portion of it. It was 1% last time, and it's 0.5% this time, and we just haven't put any CIP projects in here yet. So if we do have a bigger CIP project year next year and we incorporate that, all the percentages will slide just a little bit, and that'll take some effect there. Okay. Any questions on this slide before we talk about fund reserves? Okay, we got two left. So the first one is the general fund cash reserves, and this is on page 37 of the book. And I've mentioned in several of the last presentations and different times over the last several weeks that the 21-22 proposed budget was going to utilize fund reserves to maintain city services while nearly meeting that 2-month goal. So I think we can get there is really what the answer to that is, because the difference between the 2-month goal and what we're projecting out at 16.06% versus 16.67% is $154,150. And this doesn't take into account new construction revenue for property tax in 22 that we don't know what it is yet, and I don't feel real comfortable projecting that. So as we talked in the revenue meeting on the 6th of October, very similar, we'll be given a number from the assessor's office to say, here's more construction revenue. So I think that'll make up certainly a chunk of this. Also, we have some unfilled positions in the city right now that as we work on filling them, they're budgeted for all year, but we may not get to hiring, most notably the city administrator position. So I think with some normal operational things and, other unnormal operational things come up, unexpected expenses, but I think by the end of 2022, we can certainly get there. And I expect if there's a more robust return to business in 2022, then that will certainly help buoy the general fund reserves and give us some opportunity to do some more projects and items that council would like to add as revenues start to increase. So you can see that the blue lines represent the actual ending balance because those years have completed. We know what they are. And the red lines in here are the projected since 2020 or 2022 are not complete yet. So those are projected numbers, and the black line that comes across that is the city council goals. So you can see there's many years where we have reached or exceeded the city council goal. The last one that we were a little bit behind on was 2012, and certainly in 2022 it just isn't quite to where we would hope at this point. But there's ways we can make that up over the next 24 months. So any questions on this slide? All right. Here we go. So the next steps, the first thing I wanted to talk about is the city council goals. So as the departments present over the next 2 weeks on the budget activities, they will also discuss their activities as well as working towards council priorities and goals. In addition, I would like to hold a goal setting session. It did not occur in 2020 for COVID and other reasons, but I want to figure out a way to do that in Q1 so we can get those firmly established, get back on a program. So when we do have a permanent city administrator, this is just something that they can look at. It's something they can plan for doing every year. And it's just something that's going to be expected as we go on. So I wanted to let council know that's something that I'm working on as soon as the budget's put to bed and we can get together and meet. We'll talk about days and times that work for us. But I want to make sure that the city council goals are something that's important to staff and the mayor as well. The next item is I wanted to touch on the upcoming city council budget work sessions. I've mentioned it plenty of times, but I'll mention it one more. Monday, November 2nd at 6 p.m., a little different because of election night on Tuesday. And then the next one on Tuesday, November 10th, but at 6 p.m. as well to make sure we give every time. I did have something come up. I unintentionally didn't plan for this. Is in those work sessions, I certainly scheduled our staff to be available and present their departments. But there's two other points that I want to get some council feedback and be able to reach out to these people. Is I have not scheduled the airport to come in, and I'm wondering if you would like me to schedule the airport to come in and discuss their budget with you as well as the Chamber of Commerce. They're the ones that perform the duties of our 120 Civic Improvement Fund. I have not reached out to them. They've presented their budget items for the 120 fund. I believe those are on pages 86 and 87 or 86. I think there's several pages, but I believe that's where they start. Yes. And so I wanted to see if council would like to entertain a discussion with them as well.
Mike, this is Ann.
Hi.
Hi. Yes, I would be interested in having both of them present to us, please.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea to have both of those two come, whether we have one at one session and one at another, whatever works. But I think that's super important to have both of those in on some discussion. So.
Okay, I will absolutely reach out to Marie and Tony and check availability and send council a note as to what dates that you can expect them. Eileen, did I see your hand go up, or did I?
Yes, I support the two previous comments. And I think everybody be prepared with their questions and be able to drill down into the individual department people and kind of talk about our goals and sort of our pet projects. And I know that sidewalks are high on several of our priority lists, and see how we can inspire the individual departments that are responsible for that to make some improvements. I think that's was number one on darn near everybody's list was downtown improvements. Whether we go big or whether we go small, and try to grapple with some of these things. I think in terms of recovery, I think everyone's eyes need to be looking towards recovery. We can look at these numbers and the nuts and bolts are great and they're essential, but I think every one of us has a duty to look towards recovery, because this too shall pass. We don't know how or when, but for example, the Senior Association has already met as a board, and we have determined to be a little more realistic. We're not in a big hurry to rehire that position, but we're doing other things with some funds that we've created. So everybody needs to be looking towards what the future is as we drill down into these numbers and the projects.
And certainly over the next 2 weeks, that's what the absolute intention was behind that, where we can actually get right into the weeds on that. Because when you look at the document and the way I wanted to create it, those first 37 pages are, the real broad strokes, the graphs and everything you can see. But once you hit page 40, it's meat and potatoes time. It's what's going on in the department, what are the numbers, what's the staffing, and all the way through there on that. So I'm dubbing the next 2 weeks meat and potatoes week.
Yum.
All right. And I think I saw your hand, or?
Yeah, I just have a point of clarification. If we add the airport and the chamber, are we adding them to either, the second, the 10th, second or the 10th? Are we adding them into those meetings, or would they be at a different time?
No, we would add them into the existing schedule, and I just would want to check with them on availability, since they weren't invited unintentionally, very unintentionally. I was just so hyper focused on the city and metropolitan parks. These two funds, as I was putting it together, I was like, I should definitely bring them into the mix if the council believes that this is important information. So I just want to reach out to them and give them the ability that if they already have something scheduled on one night or the other, give them the flexibility to choose which one.
Sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, I don't know if you can see me.
I can now.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, the city council goals. I just want to really emphasize this. This is absolutely what our residents put us here for. And, until we have other goal setting retreats, our goals have stayed the same. We put a lot of time and effort. We spent $122,800 on the downtown master plan. And I know we unfortunately didn't get to move forward on some of the things that we were hoping to, permanently because of COVID. We did try to do some of the pop-up work. I don't want to see that collect dust, as Brian Davis had said, or Brian Davis Scott had said. I want to make sure that if these are our goals, this is the priority we set, that is emphasized when we hear from department heads, because I don't see a lot of the connecting of dots in between the goals that were set and some of the budget. And it may be there, but being able to articulate to us how one street resurfacing is part of our priorities. One addition to the library is part of those priorities. And honestly, it's not fair. It's not fun sometimes for departments to have to look at their budgets and explain or defend things that are not in line with those priorities. But I would like to see that, because if we're not spending on the priorities, then they're not priorities. And so that's what I would really love to see over the course of the next couple meetings, is each of these department heads who have put in tremendous amount of work on this. There's no question, but be able to to really show us how that connects what they're doing to those priorities. And, I don't know if that means that, you or the mayor can once again give that document to those department heads, but to show that, yes, downtown was number one, but we did have some other priorities, and of course they tear down from the top. But I think that would be helpful, and I would be remiss if we didn't hold people to that more priority-based approach.
And I appreciate you saying that, because once I was made interim, there we go. It's not collecting dust, it's within an arm reach of me. I've refreshed myself with the goals because I was looking very narrowly at my department, and then taking on the extra responsibilities, I had to look at this more on a global scale. So I've reached out to the departments, and they're going to work on their presentations as well, so they can connect the dots. One of the things I would like to do in the next biennial budget is to get to a priority-based budget. It's got to be in steps, but that is my goal for 23-24, is to present that in such a way.
Thank you. And that's why I said like a priority-based budget. So it's not quite under that model, but we're maybe going to feign as though it is or something.
Looks like one a little bit more reasonably, you bet.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a comment also of that. So I think Brandon brings up a really good point as far as the goal setting. And I appreciate you, trying to get that in as best as we can, given the circumstances. I will also, though, it's important for us as council to set policy and set goal. I will say, though, that we also need to rely on the expertise in our respected departments to tell us, that may be, one goal may be a great idea in the next, 2 to 5 years, but this thing, is more immediate for that department. And for the council also to be flexible, so that we can come to, an understanding, an agreement between what we want as a council, but also what the departments actually need. So I know this is something that is difficult for some of us on the council to understand, but I think, Pat, Councilmember Wright can speak to this. Mayor Johnson can as well. And I know Councilmember Sorensen was on before. And, it's really, really important for us to have those goals, but also rely on the expertise of the department to let us know this is not attainable, or this may need to be pushed out a little bit more. Just want to mention that. So, but I totally agree with you, Brandon.
Yeah, and Nathan, that's fine. I appreciate that. I would push back on any suggestion that because maybe I haven't been here as long that I don't understand that part of the process. Because what we're looking at is what I'm mentioning is connecting the dots, right? So I don't see a lot about city council goals in this document. So what I'm asking for is in the next couple of weeks that they do that, right? So that they defend that portion and say, here's why we're not suggesting this money gets spent on downtown or whatever it is, but that those dots do get connected for us, so that we're not left wondering, why aren't we talking about sidewalks in this one place, but not in downtown?
Yeah, no, and I understand, and no disrespect meant. I just know with us changing around the goal setting, it was done a little different, and I know you were there for the, different situation with the goal setting. It's just, yeah, over the years, sometimes some of our goals have gone, to the wayside. I don't like it, but so
Well,
no disrespect, Brandon.
from my standpoint, just to touch on the goals for half a second, I'm looking at the technology goals right now, and one of them is to create a new city website. Certainly that wouldn't be something that's identified in the budget since we've already done it, but then something to complete the GIS mapping system, that's something that we have talked about tonight as well. So touching on these and having these discussions that maybe are a little more nebulous, but certainly for you, Councilmember Chapman, is absolutely. Let's connect the dots so you can look at the goals and see how are we hitting these. When we do our work plans as a management group, we always have to identify what is the council goal of this particular item that we're working on. So we'll connect those dots. Eileen?
Yeah, I don't think any of us just fell off the turnip truck here, and we're well aware of the challenges that face our city, and most of us, if not all of us, involved in our community in many, many, many ways before we stepped up to serve people. And in serving the people, we have all, I think, become very good listeners. And we know what people want, and we have to kind of pick and choose sometimes and be realistic. But if we don't represent, then we deserve to be out of a job. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to represent. We're going to talk about sidewalks and pathways and parks and some of the things. And people are understanding about it, the condition of the city. Streets, people are understanding about the condition. And when their water main breaks in front of their house, they know that we have their back. So I think we're all pretty clear-headed about this, and I appreciate Mike setting aside the time to get all these folks together and get us together and set these extra meetings so we can really get down to the nitty-gritty here. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. So past the work sessions, my next bullet point is asking council what additional information would you like me to provide ahead of the November 17th tax levy setting of that. I don't necessarily need an answer tonight. I certainly want you folks though to start thinking about it. I'd like to be able to bring a resolution and an ordinance in front of you to one, and certainly have it be representative of where the council is. And that's something that can certainly be discussed over the next 2 weeks as well. But just pointing out that as part of this budget, one of the things that we discussed with the mayor and city administrator is assuming that the council would take the 1% increase. Now, after these decisions were made and things were projected, then we got into the whole discussion of the implicit price deflator, the IPD, so I can quit trying to say those three words together really fast. Certainly tip things over a little bit. So just wanted to keep that in the front of your mind because that is the next bright line date-driven item. So certainly be happy to do some more information, provide some more feedback and do that. So as the next 2 weeks go on, if there's more information you could provide me to help with this decision, I'm certainly looking forward to doing that. A big thank you to not only the council, mayor, former city administrator, Adam Lincoln, but really also to the department heads that rolled up their sleeves and worked hard on a lot of changing things. Change is very hard, and I came in, all excited, ready to go. I struggled with the budget on certain nights, but this truly was a labor of love. This is the, first time I've been on really kind of the other side. I've been in your guys' shoes. I was a 2-term councilman where I left. And now I've been able to kind of come full circle and look at what it's like to put this document together, try to anticipate the needs and the questions and the wants of city council and help shepherd our team through to provide a budget document worthy of consideration and the goals of the council and the wants and needs of this community. So I could put everybody from the city on here and list them all name by name. They've all done a huge, huge part. They've asked great questions, and they've been all just a pleasure to work with. So if I haven't said thank you to you individually during this process yet, thank you. And I apologize. I should have said it a lot longer ago. And that concludes my presentation. Are there any other questions or comments that I should answer before I turn it back over to the mayor?
Mike?
Dan?
Well, first off, thank you for being here and stepping up when we need you. So thank you for that. I had a thought about what something that would be nice to, and I know you may be talking about this later during new business, but as we approach the end of November, I think it'd be nice to get some regular check-ins on where we're at with CARES Act dollars and accounting for that, and are we actually going to be able to spend those dollars by the deadline?
Yeah, you bet. And yeah, I'm going to touch on that in new business, of course, and continue to keep you appraised on that. I expect an email by the end of the week once I can pull the sales tax numbers. And for those of you in the listening public that may not remember, although there's an election coming next Tuesday, property taxes are still due on the 31st. So please get those in. As soon as those numbers crawl in, I will let the council know if my projections were accurate or otherwise.
Mike, this is Ann.
Hi, Ann.
I just want to thank you so much. Your leadership in this process since you have been here has completely changed the way this process looks to us going into this planning phase, and also so much it informs the public so much better about the process and what goes into it and what everybody's part of it is. And I cannot thank you enough for how you clarify things and organize things and how hard you work to work with our department heads and staff to just really bring this together as easily as possible, because it isn't easy at all. So I know, excuse me, that a lot of work went into this. And I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much for the kind words. I'm not great at taking compliments, so.
Mike.
Yeah.
I've tried to give him as many compliments as I can, but Pat, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Glenn. Mike, this truly was a Herculean effort, and for you to pare this down in as concise a manner as you did was really quite something. I know all of us have shared the pain of going through previous budget presentations and all of the detail involved, and cutting right to the quick of things really, really helped in a first overview. So I appreciate the process. I appreciate all the work that you did to put this together, and I appreciate your insight, having experience on both sides of the coin now, and I defer to your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll pile on and say thank you, Mike. I can't speak any more than has already been said. You've been awesome.
Mike, since you're not good at receiving compliments, let me pile on as well. You're the greatest man we've ever known. How's that?
Can I have a little recommendation for my wife? No, I'm sorry.
I'm really glad you're not paid by the hour. You've done a tremendous job, and I've been, I've made it no secret that among my strengths, finance is one I'm still working on. Let's put it that way. And really, you being able to distill things in a way that I can understand. I so appreciate that, and the people who put me here definitely appreciate that in order to make these informed decisions. And so I think certainly you, it helps that you've been in our shoes, but I think you have a gift as well to take this complex stuff and put it in a way that anybody can understand. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think I saw Eileen had a hand up earlier. Could be wrong. Eileen, did you have, you want to make a comment? Okay.
No, I'm just suffering from allergies and doing a lot of that.
I thought I saw a hand up there, so I was just going for that. Okay. All right. With that, we are going to, you're going to still hear from Mike because we're going for another presentation. So right now, we're going to adjourn the meeting of the City Council. We're going to convene the meeting of the Special Metropolitan Park District meeting. And we've already taken roll. So the presentation is Mike Urban right now on the Metropolitan Park District.
Sure. Thank you, and good evening, board. I do not have a PowerPoint presentation for the Metro Parks because we've talked about revenue a little bit. So I'm going to refer a lot to page 114, which is the budget abstract for the Metropolitan Parks, talking about revenues and expenditures, and just kind of try to hit some high points really quick. We did discuss revenues on the 6th of October. And a question did come up earlier during that from board member Chapman regarding other ways to get revenue into the metropolitan parks. So certainly there's the property tax method, which is, you know, the very tip and pinnacle of that. There is the bond ability for the Metro Parks District to go out and bond and do projects just like the city would be able to. And then the last real true piece to raise money would be through just donations, and some dollars come in through that, but not a lot. Going back to the revenue part of that though, and the property tax, when the Metropolitan Parks District was started, it's a junior taxing district, and it was coming at 50 cents per thousand on the property taxes. But due to other junior taxing districts passing their own levies and bonds and other things, that 50 cents has been diluted down to 28.24 cents per thousand. And one of the opportunities that the board could do if they wanted to is they could go look at a lid lift for that levy. That is not something I would suggest next year, certainly, because I am very concerned about such a vote validating with the presidential election this year. And a lid lift is a little complicated. I would probably want to have a more thorough discussion in another meeting, but there is the ability to go to the voters and ask for a lid lift back to that 50 cents. So I did want to let you know that that's a arrow in the quiver. Switching gears towards the expenditures though, 2021 Metro Parks expenditures are pretty dialed in. There's certainly the insurance for the Metro Parks. That's part of what we're finding on page 114. And the other part of the expenditures on 114 would be the approved CIP projects for Metro Parks, which are summarized on page 120 on replacing the wall panels at the recreation center, to repaint the exterior of the recreation center and replace the carpet on the walkway with the rubberized walking track. So that makes up the 2021 part of the expenditure budget for Metro Parks. The 2022, because it's intergovernmental, we wanted to at least have a toehold for some of the current 2022 CIP projects, although not approved yet. We certainly wanted to present them in this budget because there is reserves to be able to handle those. So along with the usual insurance that comes through the Metropolitan Parks for 2022, there are two projects that if the 2022 CIP were approved today, would be the Sunnyside restroom replacement at $44,000 and the Sunnyside Park playground improvements at $165,000. We'll see what those projects turn into in the spring, but they're certainly reflected here as part of the 2022 budget. And we can look at amendments as the time goes on too, if things change in there. But that is a synopsis of the Metropolitan Parks District budget, and I'd be happy to take any questions on that.
Any questions off the Metropolitan Park District?
Mike, is that just like the other budget that we talked about, is that going to have a public hearing as well? And if so, what kind of information can we give to any residents so that they know what they're looking at?
As far as the public hearing goes?
Yes.
For that, okay, I'm with you. So on the 17th of November, there will be a public hearing for the Metropolitan Parks District, so the board can take input from the community as to the proposed budget. That'll be advertised through the traditional methods, and we've ramped up our social media as well. We'll get that on the website. Okay, now we're doing the, are we city, are we Metro Parks thing? So I gotta pause on that, and I'll reassess on that. But we will get the message out there in as many ways as we can. So again, Tuesday, 7 p.m. on November 17th, there will be a public hearing for Metro Parks to give input on this budget.
Okay, and will it be clear enough on revenues and expenditures as well? Because it was a very great presentation on the other stuff that you did, and I'm just curious on the Metro Parks if that'll be clear enough that they'll even know what to come and do a public hearing about.
Sure. I would caution people to really look at the document and focus it on page 114, which talks about the Metro Parks, what the activity is, what the revenue and the expenditures are. I'm going to take the opportunity on November 2nd meeting when we talk about presenting other funds, where I will perform the back and forth on the Metro Parks part of that as part of one of the city funds. So we could dig into the projects a little bit. Now, when they look at page 114 at the middle of the page, right under the verbiage, there is the intergovernmental revenue total budget. So they can see where the 2021 revenue budget is and the 2022 revenue budget is followed right behind it with the expenditure budget. And what I tried to do with the expenditure budgets is make them all uniform. So when you look at one versus the other, you don't have to look all over the place. You know where the salaries are, you know where the minor equipment is. They're all kind of in the same place. And even though there are some funds, like this one's a perfect example because Metropolitan Parks has no employees, the salaries line is blank, but it's still included. So you can go right to the operating expenses, because what they're doing is paying those expenses to the city of Pullman to perform the function of the Metropolitan Parks for them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Anything further on this one? Okay. Next on the regular agenda for the Metropolitan Park District is a motion to dispense the reading of the minutes of the Park District. Do I hear a motion on that?
So moved.
Do I hear a second? I think Eileen, please. Well, Deep will tell me you've got a second. All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we now will adjourn the meeting of the Metropolitan Park District Board. We will now reconvene the meeting of the Pullman City Council. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. These items are considered routine in nature. Do I hear a motion to read by title only?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, Laura McAloon, our city attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. Your consent agenda consists of a motion to dispense with the reading of the minutes of the regular meeting of October 20, 2020 and approve them as submitted. A motion to approve a lodging tax grant to the American Junior Golf Association in the amount of up to $30,000 for the American Junior Golf Association tournament at Palouse Ridge to be held summer 2021. A motion to approve the Pullman Fire Department to release requests for proposals to seek vendors for the purchase and installation of mobile radios, and approval of disbursements for accounts payable checks numbered 101328 through 101416 totaling $1,663,950.72.
At this point, I know Council Member Nathan Weller has a motion to go forward. Nathan?
Yes. Number one, I'd like to the meetings amend them or actually add something if that's okay.
So Mayor, you would need to have Councilmember Weller pull item number one from the consent agenda and take it separately.
Right. So is there any other issue 1 through 4 that the council would like to have out aside from the number one? With that, do I hear a motion to approve items 2, 3, and 4?
So moved.
Second.
Move in second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we now go to number one that Nathan Weller wanted to pull out. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Laura, for helping that. So it was brought to my attention that after the last council meeting, the topic of the suite of funds, and I was still something that needed to be clarified by a citizen. And so I've written this out, and we'll just submit it to the here. I misspoke recently and wanted to clarify for everyone that Whitman County's Small Business Relief Program, administered by Southeast Washington Economic Development Association as part of their stabilization grant program, provided $1 million in CARES funding for businesses throughout the county, many of them in the city of Pullman, and that it was this funding that provided the aid to my businesses. That funding was from and provided by the Whitman County Commissioners from their CRF award from the Washington Department of Commerce. I didn't properly thank the commissioners for their tireless efforts to support our Whitman County businesses. Thank you to everyone involved. And I will say, I did talk to the commissioners as well, and they said Jody, and I hope I get her name right, Ofim, it's Jody. Jody has done just amazing work as well. So wanted to clarify everything so that we can move forward on this. And I know we have our own funding as well. So apologize for that, and hopefully it's clarified.
Laura, how do you want to proceed with that?
So Councilmember Weller, did you want to make a change to any specific portion of the minutes?
Is there a way to add that to the minutes, the end to the minute?
No, because it's something that you've stated at this meeting.
Gotcha.
It can be reflected in the minutes of this meeting.
Gotcha.
But the two places where it was discussed in the minutes that are up for approval are under the consent agenda item
1. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a discussion in the minutes at the top of page following action consent on 9, right before the regular agenda. There's a discussion about Councilmember Sorensen, and I believe that's the point when you spoke up. And then there's the clarification under H when Councilmember Wright asked you to clarify. And that is explained in there. So what I'm wondering is if you want to add language to reflect anything additional in the minutes from something that happened at the meeting last week.
Well, I just wanted to be able to clarify, to further clarify, because it was mentioned that it wasn't clear enough after the last meeting. So
perhaps with that statement, it would be best if Dee added that to the minutes for this meeting to reflect this discussion on agenda item number 1.
Yes, ma'am. All right, that's great. Thank you.
Eileen has a hand up.
Yeah, just a quick note. Nathan, I think your statement is appropriate, and it has more impact in the way that Laura is suggesting that it be added to today's meeting. This has come up in the past about adding things to the minutes afterwards, and it always creates a mess. And then it gets lost, and it's gone forever. It's in the archive somewhere. So Nathan, I would strongly suggest that you follow Laura's guidance, and so everybody gets a chance to appreciate your statement.
I always follow Laura's guidance. But yes, Councilmember McCall, yes, I agree.
Okay, with that, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
I believe Councilmember Sorensen has a comment.
Al Sorensen.
Yeah, I for just a little bit further clarification, as I said at the end of the meeting last time, I have absolutely nothing to do with who gets grant funds or not. I'm on the board as a representative from the Pullman City Council, and I'm just helping them distribute checks to the businesses. And for a little further clarification, Nathan, any money that Nathan received was not, let me say that again, was not any of the money that was put in from the Pullman Cares money, which we only approved that night. And I think there was some people thinking that the money was already preset from the dollars from Pullman. This was previous Whitman County money given to SWETA to distribute. It had absolutely nothing to do with the Pullman Cares money that we contributed.
Okay. With that, do I hear a motion to approve, dispense the reading of the minutes of the regular meeting?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, there's nothing on the regular agenda, but we do have new business tonight, and then we'll go back to Mike Urban and the memo that he sent out regarding CARES money.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening again, Council. Last night I sent a memo regarding a distribution allocation for the first batch of CARES dollars. And specifically what has happened in this situation is one of the items that we brought to you early on for $362,880 for equipment and labor to support 1,800 remote sending units for utility reading. I've been working with Maintenance and Operation Manager Art Garrow on this over the last several weeks, and we have been trying to will this project to the goal line to make sure that it will happen in 2020. And our confidence that this will not be able to get done is becoming too great to ignore. We wanted to give it as much time as possible to hope beyond hope so we can proceed with this project, because it is a long-term project we believe in very much, to the point that we've put some additional dollars in the already approved 2021 CIP to augment this project. It's just a timing issue right now, working with Avista and the supplier of the AMI devices. We'd hate to keep wishing upon wish and hoping that this is going to happen and we can get these items in before the end of November. But we don't believe it's in the community's best interest to continue on with this. We're actually recommending that we abandon the CARES part of this project. We'll continue working with Avista to solidify our contract, make sure that the backbone of the system is ready to go next year, and work with Itron to make sure that all of the devices can be programmed and sent to us properly. But we're recommending to the council tonight, and we didn't want to wait until put this on an agenda next week because we believe time is of the essence, that you should consider reallocating the $362,880 that was originally attributed to this project. In my memo, I identified two specific recommendations that I hope council will consider on this reallocation. The first is the payroll reimbursement. As we continue to get reports in from our staff for the months of August, September, October, and even going into November, I'm projecting the payroll part of it to continue to grow higher, which is, it means we're spending a lot of time on COVID-related activities, but it also means that the dollars we're spending out of a lot of general fund items, especially for fire and police, to respond to the COVID pandemic, we can prop back up the general fund budget and get these reimbursed dollars. And the new projection on that is $230,000. And then the other item that we're recommending is, we've had some meetings with the city's emergency management group. And of that, the mayor and Chief Gary Jenkins of the police department, who also serves as a city emergency manager, has been part of a larger group countywide meeting and talking about how the COVID is spreading and what type of things they're looking at from the Washington State Health Department as well as the CDC. And when I originally brought forward the proposal for increasing our PPE, the goal was to make sure we get through flu season, which certainly typically ends at the end of March. And based on the guidance of Chief Jenkins and the mayor, we're actually went back to our city staff and asked them to look at their PPE numbers and bring back some additional costs so we can get all the way through summer. And looking at the CARES Act and the way it's written and discussing this with city attorney, we believe that that is a justified expenditure. So we're asking for another, recommending another $40,000 for PPE. So if you remember the dollars that we brought last time, this is a very similar number to that. So for the first 5 months and an additional 5 months. So together that equals 270,000 of the 362,880. So that remaining $92,880, I am not recommending any particular items. I'm placing some items in front of you for your consideration. Of course, you can consider the whole amount, but I'm really asking for the first two items that I mentioned. I'm sorry, Al, did I?
No, I've got to, when you're done.
Okay. I was reading, I should have been looking up, I apologize.
Sorry.
So this is hot off the press stuff. So there's 5 additional items that city staff wanted to put in front of the city council for their consideration and recommendations. The first is first 3 are equipment. First one's a sewer line rapid assessment tool. And Kevin Gardis is on the call and he can discuss that a little bit more as to what that is for. The next 2 items are fire department items, and I thought I saw Chief Heston on the call, but now oh, there he is, sorry, Chief. An auto pulse CPR device, and then the video laryngoscopes. And there's a write-up on those. And then based on previous discussions with council, there are 2 items that kept coming up as a recurring theme, and I wanted to make sure I put those on there, very similar to what we've done in the past. That's the small business economic support grants through SWEDA that we've been discussing, and then as well as additional COVID-19 testing through Pullman Regional Hospital or Washington State University. So again, I would have rather had this sewn up nice, but I threw pride aside a little bit for the better of the community. I just don't feel like we can wait on this project to happen under the CARES timeline, and I instead of missing out on these dollars, I'd like the council to reconsider this allocation.
This is the only way by the deadline that we have, it's the only way we can get it done. So with that, we'll go to Al first.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about the interruption, Mike. I was waiting, got a little jumpy. I'm liking what your suggestion is here, that we use those first 2 for payroll and the other leaving the 92,880 to do something with. And I just wanted to give a little bit of an update on the CARES grant money and the grant money that's been handed out by SWEDA, and the money that we okayed here just a couple of weeks ago or a week ago for CARES money from the city of Pullman to Pullman only businesses. And I got a little information today from the director of SWEDA, and I wanted to kind of break this down so you guys kind of understand what's going on with the grants. Before the city of Pullman added in the 360,000, there were 158 Pullman businesses that benefited from the previous grant money, contributing to 839 jobs in the city of Pullman as part of that CARES money from the county. The additional number of businesses that we were able to help, since we just put the money in from the city of 360,000, there was money distributed and it's already gone. We had some questions and concerns on whether we'd be able to spend it all or not. It has already been exhausted. and we were able to help 54 additional businesses in the city of Pullman just from our money, working on 272 jobs. So this grant money that has been available for our small businesses or any businesses with certain restrictions in Pullman was 212 businesses, helping 1,111 jobs. And I will tell you that being the representative from the city on the SUITA board, I have been personally handing out these checks in person to the small businesses. And you guys have no idea how thankful these businesses are that they're getting them. And, you know, I know Nathan mentioned about him getting some, and absolutely thankful, just as much thankful as Nathan have been other businesses in the city of Pullman. And the comments that I continue to get over and over are, small businesses never get the help. Thank you for the help. You guys, we couldn't have done a better thing in spreading this money around to the businesses in Pullman. That being said, there are a few applications that came in that we have before we shut it off that got turned in, that got denied because we had already exhausted the funds. That's how popular this was. And I would throw out to the city council tonight that of some of this $92,880 that we have here, that we think about putting a little bit more into the our City of Pullman Cares grant money so that they can kind of finish funding some of these grants that already got sent in. Now, I don't know that we can open it up anymore because we've got grants sitting there that need to be taken care of. So that's what I wanted to say about the grant stuff. My personal opinion about the other possibilities there, Mike. My own thing is I do like the possibility of the RAP assessment tool for the sewer line stuff. I think that's something that could be really beneficial. Kevin, maybe if you have something to say about that, that would be nice to go. And then my recommendation would be for us to fund that one and then take the leftover 64,388 and put that additional money into fulfilling these other few grants that are still left. And I'm happy to discuss all this with you guys and fill you in on any more if you like. But that just my comments, and I wanted to catch you all up on what a great job we've done for our businesses in Pullman.
I saw Dan's hand up. Dan?
Yeah, I'd just echo some of the comments from Al. I think, you know, Mike, your first two recommendations, I think those are good recommendations. I would support those. I would like to hear more from Kevin on what is the sewer line project. And I agree that we should look at, you know, those two items, the sewer line project, and then was it a nebulizer? The other project with the fire and ambulance services. Should look at that, and then the remaining, if we choose one of those projects or not, the remaining dollars I would support going to additional funding for the SUITA grants. But I'd be interested to hear more about the specific sewer line project from Kevin.
Kevin?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So the piece of equipment it's kind of a non-invasive and new technology, so you don't have to put it in the pipe to assess the condition. It essentially, we pull the manhole cover off, set the contraption on top of the manhole frame, and a small part of it, maybe a foot, is down into the manhole. And then it transmits a signal to a receiver that looks identical that we place on the downstream manhole. And it basically acoustically evaluates the condition of the pipe. So we don't have to put a camera inside of it. We don't have to clean it first, because we normally would clean a line and then run the camera through it to assess the condition. Because if we don't clean it first, oftentimes it gets stuck and roots or debris or whatever. So this would be a pretty slick way of not having to put sewer equipment down into the sewer system, and then we have to clean that. The workers get exposed to it potentially. So from a COVID standpoint, it reduces contact with our maintenance folks with equipment that's been exposed to the fecal coliforms in the sewer system and potentially COVID. It's actually pretty far along in its development. The EPA in 2014 did a demonstration of this through their Office of Research and Development in Cincinnati. So they did a test case where they picked a sewer district in metropolitan Cincinnati, and they tried this out on 6 to 12-inch pipelines. And it proved to be pretty effective. And I'll just read you a quick sentence from the research, the EPA's research publication. The results of this demonstration project reveal the potential for more cost-effective sewer cleaning programs. The site-specific pre-cleaning assessment and inspection costs resulting from this project, they compared them to what they normally did, which was closed-circuit TV. We normally put a TV camera in there. And their costs for doing closed-circuit TV, where you can get to the manhole on the road, it's in pavement somewhere, it was $1.68 per foot for kind of our traditional means of assessing sewers, or $2.03 a foot if the line or if the manhole was located in a backyard somewhere and it was a little bit harder to get to, just more time. And with this piece of equipment, it's 14 cents per foot for assessment. So it's 10 to 15 times cheaper for us. And what that does is it frees up a lot of time and money for us to work on other things. So it's a pretty slick, actually, piece of equipment.
Dan, again?
Follow-up question. So you talked about how this reduces kind of the potential exposure to staff in the sewer lines or equipment that's exposed in the sewer lines, but is there any aspect of this that reduces the interaction with residents for staff?
Yeah, it would indirectly, in that the better we do at assessing sewer lines and keeping them clean, the less SSOs we have, which are sanitary sewer overflows. So if there's a root ball in the line and we don't catch it in time, that backs up into somebody's house. And so they're being exposed to the raw sewage and potentially COVID through that.
Okay, thank you.
Nathan, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That actually, Councilmember Records, kind of stole my question, but it's really difficult. I like the technology. You know, I love the technology idea. It would be very difficult if there was a challenge to the CARES, in my opinion, for a purchase like that. I'm just saying, yeah, I think it would be very difficult. It seems a bit of a stretch for contact, although you did explain it relatively well. I'm just right off the top of my head, that's what I'm thinking. I like it. I think it's a great idea.
Mike, didn't you run this by Commerce a little bit?
Not this specifically, Mayor, no.
Because we know that there's going to be some testing of sewers for COVID and COVID impact in the community, probably coming up in the spring semester kind of thing, or at least that's one of the areas that's being mentioned right now. Anything that would stop any exposure to our crew, to me, would certainly justify COVID money, but I mean, that's me, and that's not Commerce Department. But
well, if Mike thinks it can, it's good, and Kevin explained it very well. So if there's any justification that needs to be made for it, then I think it's a good explanation. And we have seen from Moscow's tests of the sewer that COVID has been in there. So I understand. I just wanted to explain some of the, gears in my head thinking about this. So if Mike thinks it's good, and Kevin, you explained it well, and given the cases in Moscow. So that was it. Thank you.
Yes, Mike.
Yeah, as far as it goes, I've read this. I've talked to Kevin. I've talked to Art, who suggested this, Art Garrow, and I've included the 5-point eligibility test at the bottom. And I can make a loose case for this piece of equipment. I can make some stronger cases from other things that we did. If you guys are going solely on my opinion on this, I think it's going to come under a lot of scrutiny, and I'll fight really hard to defend it. But I also know that the utility department, if we don't use CARES dollars for this, the utility department could probably afford to do this as a project later down the road, and we don't have to skirt that line.
And Kevin, I saw you nodding your head. Go back to you, Kevin.
Yeah, Mike stole my line. I guess what I would say is if council decides that there are other items that are higher priority, we would still likely pursue this. We think it's valuable, but certainly would understand, council picking something else if that they're so inclined. So.
Okay, Ann, I saw a hand up.
Yes, thank you. Mike, can you explain a little further what the expenditures for COVID testing how would those funds be implemented specifically?
Almost exactly like the previous $30,000. It would just be supplementing that. We're seeing more and more testing going on, so it would help offset the cost of those tests with our partner, and our previous partner has been Pullman Regional Hospital.
Okay, thank you.
And there will be far more tests, as we all know. Eileen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Kevin, for a great explanation on this wonderful device. It's a modest cost. I think our CARES dollars would be better spent on the other things that on Mike's list here. But thank you for bringing this to our attention. I know what it costs to camera a sewer line, and any way we can get around that is good for all parties. And any nickel that we can throw at small business relief at this point in time is a good thing. I understand the challenges of finding nasty stuff in the sewers, but there's going to be nasty stuff in the sewers from now until the end of time. And investing in the future in this device, I think, is very wise. But let's use every nickel that we can for small business relief at this point in time.
Other comments from council? Back to Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for that explanation of that device. I also kind of have the same thoughts going around in my head about not using the CARES Act dollars for that device, but I think it's a good purchase for the future. I do think we should seriously consider the auto pulse CPR device and the laryngeal. I'm going to not pronounce that correctly, but the laryngoscopes to help prevent infection of our first responders, and also with the increase in hospitalizations and deaths from COVID that we've seen in recent weeks. I just would rather have our ambulances all equipped with that type of equipment that may be in greater need at this time. But I also think that maybe we should spend a little bit of the remaining dollars for both the increased testing, but also the small business grants. So if I'm looking at these numbers right, those two fire department expenditures would be $28,000, and then if we spent an additional $15,000 on testing, and then the remaining for small business grants, that would be that's kind of where I'm leaning.
Now, just one more clarification, Dan. The fire department requested 3 of those auto pulse, and they're at 18,000 each. That blows out.
We were talking about 18,000 for.
Yeah. No, you can't. And again, that's for every ambulance. But right now they're getting by with. They've got 2 units there. one more would get at least to cover all the ambulances that are in service. So that, I just want to make sure that's clear. Now I saw Nathan's hand, and then we'll go to somebody else. Okay, Nathan? And you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Dan. Like I said, and as Councilmember McCall explained, it's a great explanation. It's a good investment in technology and in the future. I just wouldn't want our CARES dollars coming under, my thought is coming under scrutiny, additional scrutiny, with that and sidetracking the entire thing. So I would go along with what Dan recommended. I do feel all ambulances need to have this technology. And, anything in addition to help out our medical calls, that's going to be hugely important. And it's really, small business, as you know, is very, very important, but we also have to realize it's a balance at this time with the medical and the small business. Those are the key things. So that's my opinion. I'll go along with the council.
Okay, I'm gonna go to others that have not been heard from yet. Brandon, did you have a comment on this? Okay, and Anne, saw your hand up. Okay.
Yes, thank you. I agree with most of what's been said. I think small business grants are important. I do think it is important that we continue our partnership in the testing, and I know that our residents really look to us for that. So I do think that's an important piece. And then the fire equipment as well is important, but I really would like to see the testing included somehow. Thank you.
Okay, Pat Wright, anything that you wanted to add to this before I go back to Al?
No, and I would concur really with what everyone else has had to say. And I don't think, after I chatted a little bit with Mike, I don't think there's a question about that metering going forward. It's just to make sure that we're doing it the right way. And so I think that's the important thing to consider. I don't think we're stopping. We just need to make sure that the process is in place.
Okay.
Thank you.
Al, Mike Heston. I'll go to you and then I'll go to Al. Okay. Mike.
Sure, let me kind of help, and I appreciate Mike putting this on the list. So, the latest recommendations by the American Heart is to minimize exposure to these emergency responders, and that's instead of doing CPR, using these mechanical devices and keeping your face out of the patient's face area when you're trying to do an intubation. That's what the scopes are. So, for us, we already got 3 scopes, so we could get by with what we got because we have some budgeted coming up potentially for next year. We could get by with just one of those auto pulses. That would really help us out, I think, for now. And we don't really need, we could get by with not having to get 3, because I really do support these other dollars that you're talking about to go to the businesses and the testing. And I think those are all great ideas. So to help with this, if we just got, for discussion, just one of these auto pulses for $18,500, that's really would be helpful to the fire department if that helps with the discussion. The rest of it is extra stuff. So, and the reason I put this in is because departments like Lewiston, they're getting all these kinds of things with CARES dollars too. So I just didn't know if that was one of the options. So that's really why that's in there. And again, I appreciate Mike putting that in there. So
thank you for doing that. Al, back to you.
Thanks, Mike. I was going to actually ask you to explain your requests in there, and you did it ahead of time. So thank you. I guess I would make just another comment about my suggestions here. I strongly support giving as much as we can to the small business thing. I think Kevin can get his tool later. Mike, we could get you that 1 unit. That would help you a lot. The testing and us supporting continued testing. Do I dare say don't get tested again? That turned into a nightmare last time. So I guess I would be in favor of putting a little bit into testing, maybe 10,000 or something like that. But I think that would be quite an additional amount compared to what we put in last time when we had a huge sum of money. So I think, Mike, could you help us out on this a little bit with some numbers here?
Yeah, I've been crunching them as you've been talking under your scenario of using the 92,880, purchasing one auto pulse for the fire department, putting 10,000 towards testing. That leaves $64,380.
Okay. Dan, saw your.
I kind of like that.
Okay, Dan.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, do we have the money that we allocated previously for testing? Do we have any kind of feedback yet on what the impact of that is? How much of that is anticipated going for testing? I mean, has that money already been spent, or do we have any kind of feedback from the hospital on that?
There's no feedback on that. I can certainly chase that down and see if we have anything. How they're doing it as far as if they're subsidizing tests or how they're using those dollars. Yeah.
Okay.
I would, based on that, I would say either go forward with the numbers that Al suggested, or get some more feedback from the hospital on what is the actual need there for those dollars. I'm a little concerned about giving more money when we don't know what's already been spent or what's already been allocated or what the anticipation is there.
And we're not going to get that information timely for that right now. So what you came up with so far, what Mike has shared with you, is to get one auto pulse. And I think we're going to forget about the testing because we've already allocated money for that already. And we have to get this thing going to make the deadline to spend the money. And you've already had a suggestion of using the other money for small businesses. So I just want to make sure you're all clear on that. Nathan?
Yeah, I'll support. I mean, yeah, we're not going to get any information back regarding that, but it is important to balance that. So I'll support what Al said as well, because we do have feedback. So.
Anne.
Thank you. I just have a question. I fully support these numbers as well, but I remember hearing something about businesses double dipping, or how or not, they're not doing it, but making sure that they're not receiving funds either more than once or from more than one source or something like that. So I'm concerned about that. And how do we determine, we've already allocated to some businesses, as Al pointed out, how do we determine who gets the rest of these dollars? And I thought Al said there were only a few businesses, applications that had come in. So is that, does the number who we're thinking about fulfill the amount that we're allocating? Does that make sense? I just like some clarification on, we've got 3 businesses and they're each going to get $22,000 or whatever it is. If you could help with that, Al.
I could help with that a little bit if you want, Glenn.
Al, yes, please.
So no business is going to get more that they've already got. Okay. What we're talking about is fulfilling some grant requests that came in after we ran out, and we actually lowered some of them to spread it out. Instead of everybody getting a large sum, we spread some of it out and lowered a little bit. So there are, I can't tell you the exact number because they got a couple more via email, but there's probably enough there for us. If we have the $60,000 to $70,000, that would pretty much take care of everything that has come in, with no additional and no double dipping per year saying there. So I don't have an exact number, but that I can tell you is not happening at all with this. And Sweeta's verification of all of this is quite well. And Mike has received the first recording of all of this broke down. So I think we're really close to this. We did pay Suida a minor fee earlier, and I think I would leave that to Mike to negotiate. I think they would take even a lower fee just to add this in because all of the other processing is done. It's just a matter of having the funds to fill them.
Right.
So
It sounds to me like we have a total agreement on the 270,000 that Mike has laid out as far as payroll reimbursement and safety supplies, and also agreement on the 18,500 for one autopause CPR device. And then I've heard, I want to make sure it's clear from all the other council members, the rest of the money going to small business economic support grants. Because we cannot get information from the hospital as far as how much testing.
yeah. Okay.
Pat, I saw your hand up really quick.
Thank you, Glenn. I would just like to have further clarification on exactly what double dipping means. Does that mean that the same business can't apply for another grant, or that they can't apply for the same use of the grant as they applied for previously? Did that make sense?
Yeah. Pat, there won't be any additional grants coming in. It's the ones that are already there, and these are ones that have been unfulfilled. We're not going to give any additional money to anyone that's already received or been awarded a grant, because we haven't handed any money out yet. We don't have the money yet.
Right. Okay.
So I think what Ann was meaning by double dipping was somebody getting more on top of, and that's not going to happen.
No, and I've heard that terminology before, and so that's just kind of why I wanted clarification on that. So thank you.
Some of that's national news stories too that have been on, but it wasn't Sweden. Okay, so to make sure that's clear. So
Well,
do we have agreement then of what we outlined?
I would move to adopt what we just said. Mike, can you read it off and I'll verify that for you?
Sure. Of the $362,880 that I'm requesting council to reallocate, $230,000 will be earmarked for payroll, $40,000 for first aid, medical supplies, and PPE, $18,500 for an auto pulse for the fire department, which leaves $74,380 for me to talk to Suida about using for business grants and try to negotiate the previous money down to a reasonable rate so we can fulfill as many business needs as humanly possible.
I would make the
Second.
Motion second.
Do that exact thing.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? See none.
Thank you,
Okay,
council.
the number's done, and we've got it done tonight, so we can make deadline. Okay, as far as new business is concerned, is there any other new business coming from the council? We have no new business coming from our open public line that I've heard of. At this point, pursuant to authority, that the city council will adjourn to the executive session, and this executive session will last 10 minutes. It's for the purpose of discussing strategy or position to be taken by the city during the course of collective bargaining. Again, it's going to take 10 minutes. It is 9:37 right now. It's going to take a minute for us to go through the re-inviting to the executive session. So stand online, then you'll get an invite to go to the executive session. And then that will take place. So again, it's 9:38 now. So at 9:39, we'll start the executive session.
And so we just stay here?
Stay here online. You'll get a special invitation to go to the executive session because RingCentral is very special. Just stay here and then you'll get your invite. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
have 9:49, Mayor.
Okay.
You got a Twitter shout out tonight for the great job on the broadcast, by the way.
He had
From a-
15
from a
seconds,
resident.
and now we have the 15 seconds. Now, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Moving seconded. Okay. Did Mike? Did you catch who did? Because we don't. Oh, there's. Oh,
Dee
Dee's
is
back
on.
on. Dee's
Just
on.
pick one,
Okay, good.
Dee. Just pick one.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, fine. We're out of here. It's
Good night,
9:50.
everybody. Stay safe.